In this video, I'll be building a new clamp design that I came up with. And if you're interested in building some of these for yourself, there are plans available and there's a link in the description. Now these can be made from any type of hardwood, and actually you could probably get away with softwood as long as it's good and strong and straight grained. But I've got a piece of ash that I'm going to use for the parts. And I'm cutting this from a larger piece, but you can also use scraps if you have them, since most of the parts are fairly small. One of the really interesting features of this clamp is that it doesn't have notches or anything else in the bar for the moving jaw to grip onto. Instead, it uses a wedge, and that's what I'm cutting here. I made a simple jig from a piece of plywood to do that. And then to grip the bar, I'm going to glue on a piece of sanding belt with either epoxy, or what I'm using here is polyurethane construction adhesive. The glue and the sandpaper has to be very strong. Regular sandpaper won't work here. Here I'm drilling a 3/8 inch hole in the pad retainer. And then this next hole is 3/4 of an inch in the pad itself. And now I have one of the handles in my wooden drill press vise. And I'm going to drill a 3/8 inch hole about 2 inches into the end. And of course you can leave these in the original rectangular type shape, but I like to take the time to make them a little bit more comfortable to use. And I'm doing all of that on the belt sander. And now that the handles are shaped, I can glue in the threaded rod. You'll notice here that I've flattened a spot on one side of the threaded rod, and that will actually key into the handle. And once again, the glue that I'm using here is polyurethane construction adhesive, but you could also use epoxy for this. Along with that, I'm going to assemble the fixed jaw and the moving jaw, starting here with the fixed. What I've done is I've taken the two pieces that go above and below the bar, and I'm using a piece of masking tape to hold those in line. And I'll get some glue in there, and then I can add one side to the top as well. Now here's where some of you are going to say, well, you need a clamp to make a clamp, and of course you do, but then the clamps that you use don't have to be very good, and they certainly don't have to be very expensive, and if you're handy at all, you can use homemade ones as well. Next I can get the moving jaw put together, and here I'm driving in some pins to hold the parts so that they don't move around while I clamp them. Now what I did was I left those parts to dry overnight, and now the next day I'm sanding the moving jaw here, flush up all the sides and make it look good. And the inside of the fixed jaw is difficult to sand, so what I've done is I've clamped it in my gear vise here, and I'm just going to scrape it smooth with a 3/4 inch chisel. This next part is optional, and it's to trim off the end of the fixed jaw at an angle. It might be handy to do this if you need to fit the clamp into a tight space, and it really doesn't affect the overall strength of the clamp. Now back to the moving jaw again, and I need to drill a hole for the lead screw. Actually two. The first one is a 7/16 inch hole, and that's mainly for the T-nut. And then I'll finish drilling the rest of the way through with a 3/8 inch bit. To mount the T-nut, I'm going to drill holes for these tangs, otherwise the tangs will split the wood. So I'm going to use the T-nut itself to mark those and then drill them out. And then I can drive the T-nut in and secure it with a small screw. With that done, I can move on to assembling the moving jaw by screwing in the handle first. And then I'm going to slip on the retainer that I drilled a hole in earlier. And to hold the nut onto the end of the threaded rod, I'm going to pound on it. Give it 3 good whacks. Another way, of course, is to glue it on with epoxy. And also you could put a pin through it. I've done that before. But this is the easiest and the fastest, and also probably the most secure. I'm going to get a little bit of Vaseline on the end of the threaded rod for lube, and then get the washer put inside the pad and glue that together. With that done, it's important to check the lead screw to make sure that it turns freely and that it's not hung up in there. Now on top of the wedge, there's a piece of sheet metal that does 2 things actually. First is that it makes it more durable, and second, it's bent up on the end, and that's what holds the wedge in while you're using the clamp. Last thing to do with the wedge is to mark out the finger notch and round over the end, and I'm just using a washer and a bearing that were handy to mark those out. The last assembly step is to glue on the fixed jaw pad, and I'm actually going to use the clamp itself to clamp that part in place. Once again, this next step is optional, but I recommend that you finish the clamp in some way. Here I'm using water-based polyurethane, and I'm going to give them 2 coats, sanding in between each coat. And what that does is it adds a little bit of protection to keep the clamps looking clean, and it also helps to prevent glue from sticking to the surface. Anyway, like I said at the beginning of the video, there are plans available for these clamps. I tend to look at clamps like this as something not that you need specifically, but something that you actually deserve. I mean, if woodworking is your hobby, you're generally making stuff probably to give to other people, and usually not for yourself. Now this can be a little present that you give to yourself, and you'll have it for years to come. Every time you use it, you'll appreciate the time that you put into making them.